Hello and welcome back to A Drunk History of Middle-earth. This is a show where we take the legendarium created by J.R.R. Tolkien and have a good, simple, wholesome chat about it. Sometimes it's a drunk person, me, trying to explain stories or events, and sometimes it's breaking down the stories and concepts as if we're talking to a drunk person. I'm Chris, I'm an avid Tolkien nerd, I'm still learning and realising how much I actually don't know. And joining me is your co-host and my lovely wife Rebecca. Do you want to say hello?
Hello, I'm Rebecca, a complete novice to all things Tolkien and nerdy in general. Although now I've watched all 3 films, extended editions, and can now confirm that I have been converted to the religion headed by Elrond Tubbard.
Long may he live. Right.
Zoltan.
That's the intro sorted. Let's get into today's episode. Can you name all 4 hobbits that were in the Fellowship?
Bilbo, Frodo. No. Frodo, Pippin, Merry, and Sam.
Right, okay. What was...
Bilbo's the...
Frodo's uncle?
Yeah.
Name any two of the Valar.
Is this a piss take?
Just name any 2 of the Valar.
Oh, Jesus. Morgoth.
Yep.
And not Eru. Oh, I'm terrible at names. You've put me on the spot.
Yeah, that's I'm warming you up trivia wise. What's the one who calls Morgoth to run when he laughed?
Right. It won't help because the names aren't there in my brain. So you giving clues, they aren't actually clues because the words aren't in my brain. It's a different language. I cannot remember it.
Do you remember who forged the dwarves? Who made them?
I can't remember the names. I'm telling you, I cannot remember the names.
Owly. Alright, okay.
It's complete gobbledygook to me.
Can you remember the name of the world?
No, I cannot remember. I can't remember the names.
That's so weird that you store
I can't.
names differently. Alright, do you remember what happened last episode?
My brain's in a different place. I cannot remember.
The elves.
The elves woke up.
Yeah. Do you remember what?
There was 3 elves pairs that woke up.
Yeah.
They went on a walk and picked up other elves.
Yeah, they did. Yeah. And do you remember how many they ended up with eventually?
I don't know because it was a whole lot of numbers.
Yeah. So they ended up with 144 eventually.
Is this us just testing the microphone here?
No. This is the episode. It's just you appreciated last episode when we had a little bit of trivia warm up. So I thought I'd do that with you, but I didn't tell you about it.
That's embarrassing.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, you're gonna have to live with that. I've been editing. I've been spending time editing our first Fellowship episode again because when it first came out, I didn't do any editing at all, and it took a long fucking time.
How is that payback though? Because
I had to listen to your voice for ages.
You were the one who stuck it straight out when you were drunk.
Yes.
That wasn't the plan.
That's true. Right, well anyway, welcome to the show, everybody. Quick reminder that this episode is a direct continuation of last week's episode where we talked about the awakening of the elves at Cuiveanin. So if you haven't listened to the origin of the elves or the awakening of the elves, you might want to go back and listen to that episode. So we'll crack on. But firstly, we've got a Discord server now. I set that up. And you'll find a link in the description. It's very small at the moment. It's just mainly me posting memes to 4 people. But if you want to come and chat about the show, Lord of the Rings in general, come join me. You've got to start somewhere. And I also hope everyone likes the new artwork. And if you don't, go fuck yourself because you're not the one who paid for it.
I'm a bit concerned because when you said, I hope you like the new artwork, you gestured to me.
Yeah.
So is there some artwork that I've not seen?
You are a very famous porn star.
Oh.
But I thought you'd be annoyed when you found out. Alright, lastly as well, if we're at that stage, that annoying stage of a podcast, if you could rate us or leave a review or whatever, wherever you listen to it. But let's not fuck about with that. Let's get straight onto it. So I won't ask you again what happened last episode, but do you remember we left it off with Melkor being aware that the elves had woken up?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Right. Now the elves were awake and had chosen their companions, and in total there was 144. Imin and his wife, and their 12 had searched for a while for other elves but didn't find them. And there's a Reddit user called Pinky the Duck who messaged, I know what a name, right? He pointed out quite rightly, so in the volume 12 of the History of Middle-earth, The War of the Jewels, which I've got on my bookshelf over there, it states that this story of the elvish origin that I told last episode is preserved by the elves as a fairy tale and a way to teach young elves how to count. It's like when we sing Five Little Ducks to our daughter. It's kind of like that. And the story is called by the elves the Quivieniana, which is like the story of the awakening. Regardless, though, because it's the most information we have about the awakening of the elves, I'm gonna think, I choose to think that it did happen like that. Like they woke up under the stars with the sound of waterfalls and then went walking and found people as they were waking up. I don't know, what do you think? Would you, if it had to happen another way, what would you think?
I would like to think that they were like meteorites that shot through the atmosphere onto the earth. Or not the earth, but
You've been watching Rings of Power?
And no.
Oh, because that's what...
I've never even seen it.
Well, that's one episode that happens. It's not an elf.
Oh, well, they come from meteorites. Because, obviously, they praise the stars. So if they were fallen stars, but not in the sense of, like, fallen angel type.
Yeah. Oh, okay, so they were actually stars.
They were actually stars, and then when they die, they become stars again.
Do you know what's so fucked up? Not fucked up, but weird, is that in the Chronicles of Narnia, C.S. Lewis, who is old Toller's friend, the stars are people.
Well, there you go.
So in I think it's the Voyage of the Dawn Treader, they look for like when they get really out into like the furthest like parts of the world, they meet a star.
I mean, we are all stardust, so
yeah,
it would make sense.
It's interesting now because I know you haven't read the Chronicles of Narnia.
What would tell you that?
Because you don't read. You don't,
I do read.
Have you read the Chronicles of Narnia?
I think I've read the first page.
Yeah. Right.
It's on my list.
Right, okay. But yeah, so it's interesting you mentioned that because in C.S. Lewis's writings, stars were people, and yeah, that's quite a nice little...
You are so rude.
Well, for pointing out a fact. We've got a whole podcast about Tolkien, so you don't have to fucking read it yourself.
That is not the purpose of the whole podcast.
So, we'll go back to the story. One day, Orome was out hunting. As you know, he likes to go to Middle-earth to hunt. And he rode east, very far, because most of this shit's happening right in the west, right? But when he rode east, and then eventually came to the Sea of Helkar, which I've shown you on a map, is just a giant inland sea. And he goes around the bottom of it, and then when he turns north, he keeps going, and eventually his horse, Nahar, who's descended from...
Shadowfax.
Yeah, there we go. So
but that horse has a good name.
Well,
Shadowfax.
You could have just said
Middle Earth. You can remember things like that. You can't remember Thori, Tori, and Borri.
They are so close to three dwarf names, and you still fuck them up.
But Thorin, Borin, and Torin.
No. Oh my god.
But do you know what I mean? Like it's a different language. I am assuming that people in different countries probably will be able to remember these names easier than we can as English people because some of their languages may sound similar to the names. Those names are, honestly, it's like Arabic to me, those names.
Fair dues.
I cannot remember them. I can't find any way to remember them. It's just not happening.
Right, well, Nahar stood still as they came around the bend of the Sea of Helkar and started neighing, and Orome, faintly off in the distance, could hear the sound of singing. And so, at last, the elves were found by the Valar, and these were the ones they'd made the world ready for, and had finally appeared. And Orome was filled with wonder at what seemed to be a sudden chance of finding them. And this bit was hard for me to understand. Like when I had to read and reread the Silmarillion, and I came across the hardest sentence I've ever read in my life. But essentially it boils down to, when Eru showed them the vision of what was going to happen with the world, and even though they knew the children were coming, it still filled them with delight and wonder, as if they were, and they were still perceiving it for the first time, even though they knew it was coming. They were still experiencing it for the first time.
Yeah, because they'd never seen it.
Yeah, so it was that, and Yeah, it's because it's that these things were perceived as new and unforeseen, and I think that's kind of like a gift from Eru to the Ainur, that even though they know everything, they can still perceive it as if it's for the first time, so that it's not like they're not having God mode switched on, because otherwise it becomes very boring very quickly, in my opinion. But in the beginning, the elves were stronger and greater than they were in the Third Age. But the only thing that hasn't diminished is their beauty. And it's said that sorrow and wisdom has enriched their beauty over time, which for me goes back to what Eru said about, when the second and third theme of the music started, and the third theme in particular didn't seek to override Melkor's theme, but it took the bad things in, and it made it more beautiful because of that. And I've said to you before in a previous episode, like, how it's kind of like can be quite sexy if like you like smudge your mascara or something. So I imagine that it's just like that. So an elf with smudged mascara must just give you a raging stonk on.
Why is everything so sexual right now?
I don't know. Orome loved the elves immediately. He was just like, I like you. You're mint. And he named them the Eldar in their own language, which was Quenya. So a big thing about last episode is that they spent a lot of time making language and music and poetry and all that. And so Orome gave them the name Eldar in the language that they'd made for themselves. But, unfortunately...
Could he not have just called them elves? Do
Well,
they have to have multiple names, everything?
Everything has to have multiple names. Everything. Your middle name's Louise, so everything's got a middle name. But Melkor, as is common now, had been an absolute sneaky little shit. And he'd sent evil spirits to fuck with and hurt the elves. So as I mentioned last episode, any that strayed too far away were like kidnapped, and it's contentious.
Yeah.
But it's the most common origin given for where the orcs came from is that they're twisted elves. But over the years, because again, we cover like we'll say a sentence and it's actually covered like 3,000 years, right? But over the years that this was happening before they were discovered, the elves began to say amongst themselves that the hunter had got them. And Melkor knew what he was doing, because even in the Third Age and like later, like obviously we're in the Seventh Age now, but allegedly the elves are still somewhere in a man, just living their best life. The elves who lived in Valinor, the most ancient elves who lived in Valinor, still sang songs that remembered the shadow shapes that walked in the hills above Quevenin, or a shadow that would pass suddenly over the stars. And these songs would tell of a dark rider on his wild horse that would ride down elves who strayed and would devour them. And the reason for all this was that Melkor hated and feared the riding of Orome, because you remember a few episodes where I said that when he went to Middle-earth, the ground would tremble,
yeah,
and Melkor would shit himself because he knew eventually the Valar were coming for him. And obviously, as we've seen, this turns to fear, and this fear turns into hatred and what have you. So he set his servants on horses. So he said, like, go, dress up like a huntsman and go fucking kill some elves, or kidnap them and bring them back, turn them into orcs. So that's exactly what they did. And these elves were said to be taken, eventually, were twisted and turned to orcs through torture and slow cruelty, it says. Which, slow cruelty sounds worse than torture, and I don't know why.
Slow cruelty sounds like mental abuse, doesn't it? Like the beaten house wife or husband. It sounds like that sort of mental abuse, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Than torture, because usually like torture's classed as like physical abuse.
Yeah, slow cruelty.
Mental's something that they can a lot of people cannot get past.
And orcs are fucking awful. Like, they do cruelty for fun. Like, that it's a sport to them is cruelty.
Yeah, because they've been mentally and physically abused.
It must have worked. So when Nahar, Ned, and Orome came to the elves, some of them hid and ran away and were lost to be handily hoovered up by the servants of Melkor, obviously waiting in the shadows for them. But the ones who had courage to stay saw very quickly that the light of the Valar, like it was one of the Valar, the light of a man was in Orome's face, and he wasn't evil, and they were drawn to him. So yeah, it's again, we'll come back to the orcs just once more because they enter so much into the story. It's not 100% certain how they came about, but it is the belief by most that deep, deep down in the bowels of Autumnal, the elves were held there and bred together and twisted, and eventually over generations they'd become a twisted mockery of the elves. But
So, any orcs from now, do orcs reproduce?
yes, well, that was my next point.
Okay.
I think it's because there's a few different stories, right, and there's a few different answers given throughout Tolkien's writings about what exactly the origins of the the orcs are. But the likely explanation is that they were elves because they had life, and they multiplied like the other children of Iluvatar, like they bred. So but it's also
Imagine that orgy.
it's fucking yeah. Back on the fuck pile, boys. It said that deep in their heart, the orcs hated Melkor. And it is true, it is kind of referred to because they laughed when... towards the end of the First Age, Fingolfin challenges Morgoth to a duel. And Morgoth doesn't want to come forth, but he does. And he gets stabbed in the foot by Fingolfin. And the orcs like laugh at him behind his back and stuff like that. And even later on in the Third Age, like they rebel against Sauron and like they're talking about deserting and stuff. So they're still dominated by these evil people, but they have like I don't know if it's free will, but they have like independent thought.
Decisions.
Yeah. But so just on the twist on the breeding of the orcs and twisting it from elves, this is regarded as the worst thing that Melkor has ever done. Is to take something so beautiful and pervert it and twist it into such wretched creatures.
It just sounds like a night out with us.
And of all the shitty things that Melkor does, this is the one that Eru hated the most. Like, this is the one that Dad really did not enjoy. Which is interesting because it's a real big parallel to Aule, who... the way he did it and what he did and how he went about it, Eru gave them free will and gave them life, Whereas he'd looked at what Melkor's done and he's like, you horrible little cunt. Which could be described, that could be used to describe him a lot, to be fair. But again, back to the story. Once they'd been discovered, Oromir went back to Valinor and told everyone else what was going on. The Valar were happy because they knew that the children were coming, and Mandos said they'd waken under the stars and they're coming soon, so his prophecy had come true. But they were also a bit doubtful because they didn't know what to do about this now. They didn't know how to protect the elves from Melkor. Whilst they thought about it and decided, Oromir went back and stayed with the elves. And when eventually the elves will come to a man, Oromir's their leader, he guides them, and he loves them so much. Manwë typically went and sat back on his mountain to think about it. He went back to Taniquetil for a long time thinking about what to do. And eventually, he spoke to his dad, Eru, and asked for his advice. And Eru told him. So he went back to the other Valar and told them, we need to retake Middle-earth at whatever cost in order to save the elves. Because the influence of Melkor it's too bad. Tulkas was buzzing at this. He was always ready for a scrap, obviously being a fucking natural libre. But Aule was upset because he knew how much damage was done last time they fought Melkor and how much damage was going to be done this time. And he's right. Spoiler alert, the world's going to change again. And literally the sentence in the Silmarillion is just one sentence of like, so the war starts. And it's just...
How ominous.
Yeah, it covers thousands of years. It's like, again... the Valar attacked the fortresses of Autumno and Angband. And I don't think I mentioned this in the last episode, but when Angband is constructed, Morgoth raises mountains in front of it called Thangorodrim, which belch smoke constantly to obscure the whole area. And it's in the northwest again, so it's to warn and to stop the Valar from coming, to make it harder for them. And this is fucked up, right? Even though the elves had no part in this war, none whatsoever, it was Valar against, Melkor and all his servants. Melkor never forgot that they were the cause of his downfall. Like, the Valar were doing this for them. And the worst thing is, the elves didn't really know much about the war. They were still in Cuivain. The Valar had set a guard for them above the land so that while they were fighting, they'd be protected. They didn't know much about the battles, except that the ground shook beneath them, the waters moved, and away in the north it looked like a great many fires had been lit. And that's all they knew about it, but Melkor blamed them 100%, which is just... Melkor met the Valar in the war in the northwest of Middle-earth, and because of this, much of that part of the world is going to break again. So like it says like the sea becomes a lot bigger and wider, and a man's like drifts further apart. There's bays created, and the Helcarax is, which is like the it's like the ice between Aman and Middle Earth. It's like an ice bridge kind of thing, but it's very dangerous. It's called like the grinding ice. But at the gates of Autumnal,
what happens with that? The
well,
ice.
The Helcarax. It's just made more dangerous and like kind of like chipped away, made narrow, I think. But at the gates of Autumnal, there was many battles. So I've got here, the sea between Middle Earth and Aman grew a lot bigger, and the lands in the far north, like Helcarax and whatever, became desolate, amongst other things. And above, beyond the northern mountains, now in Middle Earth, it's called the Northern Wastes, because it's all like up past Dale and like Erebor, like the Lonely Mountain and what have you. So once you get past that, and then you've got in the west, you've got Angmar, and then you go further north than that, and that's the Northern Wastes. So the Witch King of Angmar obviously was the King of Angmar in the Second Age.
See, like, why does you've got Angmar and Angbang that are so close together?
I think Ang in Tolkien's, I can't remember which language it is. I think it's either Sindarian or Quenya or Quendi or whatever. Ang means iron.
Right. Okay.
I think, because there's also a chain that's going to come into play. Ooh. Wink, wink. I think the Ang means iron, or it's part of the word iron in one of his languages. But part of the desolation in the north was because of how deeply and extensively Autumnal had been delved under the world, and it had been filled with Melkor's army. So he literally built hell, and in this he packed entire armies and stuff like that. And in the Beren and Luthien, like in the verses, there's a picture by Alan Lee that he's illustrated where Luthien gets everybody asleep in Morgoth's halls. And it's carved with pillars and stuff like that with like grotesques on them, and just like creepy, horrible shit. And you imagine it's just a whole subterranean country full of evil creatures, which is awful. But at last, and I say this again, we've just covered like so many thousands of years, but after so much fighting and destruction, and this is the meme I made and sent you yesterday, the gates of Autumnal were broken open and the roofs were peeled back, and Melkor had hidden in the deepest pit. Tulkas dragged him out, just like Brian gets dragged out from under the bed in Family Guy by Quagmire. and Tulkas entered and wrestled Melkor and threw him on his face. Personally, I like to imagine this was a suplex, because I'm imagining... I know I said Nacho Libre earlier, and I made another meme this morning and sent it to you. But you know Bonesaw from Spider-Man?
Yeah.
Like it's Macho Man Randy Savage. It's I imagine like Melkor's just hiding, and like it echoes because it's in Angbar, it's in Autumnal, and all you hear is "Oh yeah!" Tolkas is coming for him. I got you for 3 minutes, brother. But once Melkor was subdued, he was bound with a chain that was forged by Aule, and this chain was called Angenor. Now, in a second, but he was taken as a captive by the Valar. And peace reigned for a very long time, and we'll come on to that in a second. But firstly, there's a lot of inspiration from Norse mythology for Tolkien, obviously, right? That's just, it is what it is. He took inspiration from all sorts of places. But Angenor, this in particular, stands out to me because it is a one-for-one. It's a fucking dead ringer for Gleipnir, and that's the chain that binds Fenrir, the wolf. Do you know, from Norse mythology, the one that will kill Odin during Ragnarok? It's just a 1-1 inspiration, and from this I kind of extrapolate. Like I was thinking about it when I was going to work, but I was thinking like in Norse mythology, Fenrir is made to be evil. He's evil by design because that's the part he has to play in Ragnarok. He has to kill Odin, and one of Odin's sons will avenge his death by stabbing Fenrir, and like in some versions he rips off his jaw. Have
we attacked Fenrir before
I think you've been playing
World of Warcraft thing?
There's big wolves. I think you might have been watching me play God of War when I fought Fenrir, maybe. But yeah, so like it's just that Norse mythology is like Fenrir is evil by design because he has to be, and that's the part he has to play in Ragnarok. And it got me thinking that like, wouldn't it be much more sad and kind of tragic if Melkor never just corrupted himself by himself? He was always meant to be evil, and he was always meant to be that because that's the grand scheme that Eru had. Is that, and it says, and I think I'm supported here. It says that the elves' beauty was enriched by wisdom and sadness.
And as well, it's a point that I've made in some work that I've been doing this morning, that without imprisonment, you can't understand freedom.
Yeah.
So you always have to have the opposite in order to appreciate or understand.
So the marring of Arda, like, what if Eru would... And I don't know what Eru said, in the end everything will serve my design. But what about if it wasn't in the end? What about if it was in the beginning, everything...
You wouldn't have any consequences to your actions either if there was no good and bad.
Yeah, exactly. Like, so I don't know, I'm
just
coming...
Just be a free-for-all.
I want to think more about this, but I'm coming around to thinking that maybe Eru intended this instead of it just being like... Instead of, I said before, the universe will write itself, what if the universe is going exactly as planned?
Yeah, like, I don't know whether it's the way that you've been telling it to me, but I have a lot of sympathy for Melkor.
Oh, I don't. He's a cunt.
Oh, see, I do.
He's just a petty bully.
Oh.
But, you know, like...
What made him like that?
Yeah, I know, but, like, I can understand... Yeah, it's like Christian, isn't it? Like, you can you can have some sympathy, but...
Can we not bring Chris Chan into this, please?
You can have sympathy, but you still don't have to condone, or, you know, you don't have to... It doesn't excuse them. You can understand, but it doesn't excuse them. But if we've got a Chris Chan, we've strayed too far. So, the Valar didn't find everything that was hidden under Angband and Utumno. So lots of evil creatures were able to escape and disperse and carry on being evil. One of whom was Sauron, who fled. He had fucked off somewhere and was not seen for a long time. At one point, the greatest of all Maiar is Manwë's herald, and he's called Eonwë. And Sauron threw himself before Eonwë and said, like, give me forgiveness, please. And he said, go and speak to Manwë, you mad bastard. And then Sauron was like, no, I'm not going back there. So after this point, I don't think Sauron ever goes to a man. But yeah, that's not his part in the story. When Melkor was brought back to Valinor in chains, he was thrown on his face in front of Manwë, where he did beg for forgiveness. Manwë denied this, and Melkor was sentenced to serve 3 long ages in the halls of Mandos, in a place that was inescapable, even for one of the Valar. And he'd stay there until he could beg for pardon again. And as far as I could tell, 3 ages mentioned here was just 3,000 of our years. But it's enough time for the elves to prosper and what have you. Because you'll see, when he's fresh out the pen, he's able to start some shit. And because Manwë isn't evil and there's no evil in his heart, when Melkor comes out with his teardrop tattoo on his face and that, and his spiderweb on his elbow, and, you know... And
he no longer bends over for the sword in the shower.
Yeah, he just kind of says, like, oh, I'm not evil anymore. Manwë's like, finger guns. He's like, oh, sweet, bro. See you later. He can just go and do whatever. Well, he has to stay within Valmar for a bit, the city in Valinor. But eventually,
he has a tag.
Yeah, he's on tag. He's on tag for a bit. He's on remand. And then eventually he is allowed to just go and do what he wants. So yeah. The Valar, so Melkor's done. He's dusted. However, there's still the issue of the elves, right? What do we do to protect them? And the Valar were indecisive about this. Some wanted them to leave. Some wanted to leave them to walk Middle-earth. But I think Ulmo was one of these. He was like, just leave my little people alone. But eventually, it was decided that they would summon the elves to a man so that they could live in the light of the trees forever and be protected, which pretty sweet. I think it's I think it was like the phrase used in the Silmarillion is like, we will gather them to the knees of the powers so that they may be protected. Like, they are looking at them like the children of Ilúvatar. And like I've mentioned before, they view themselves as our brethren, like our brothers and sisters, as opposed to like ruling over us. So they just want to protect their little siblings. Once they said, we want them to come and live in the light of the trees forever and be protected, Mandos spoke, and again, he doesn't speak very often, and says, so it is doomed, which is basically sealing the deal. Like, that's their lot in life now. That's what they need to do. And that's what we see, is that all elves eventually will make it to the west, regardless of whether they get there now or in the Third Age or later. Because I think Celeborn is the last elf to leave Middle-earth, and he doesn't leave until the Fourth Age. So there's a couple of hangers on. And with that, we're going to end the story part of our episode today in quite a peaceful, nice place. What do you think, Becca? Are you hopeful for the future of the elves?
Well, I mean, they're protected, so...
Well, currently they're still in Cuivanen, but, you know, the summons are there. Oromir's going to
they've
go
got, I think it gives them more of a... Well, I know they don't have free will, but it gives them more scope to be more adventurous because they know that ultimately they're going to go somewhere nice.
No, that's a point of contention, because not all of them believe it, and not all of them get there. It's not just... I'll show you a tree, but there is a tree of all the different types of groups of elves, and they're split into who sees the trees, who doesn't, and more and so beyond that. So, before we go to the fun fact for today, which is a doozy, this is the end of what we're going to call Season 1 of the podcast, because next week, the week after, we're going to do some... or maybe 3 weeks, because we've got some holidays coming up. We're going to do a couple of palate cleanser episodes. It's going to be subjects that are more closely related to the Lord of the Rings films, and things from the Third Age primarily. Of course, if there's history, it'll have all the ages mixed in. But we won't be continuing the story of the Silmarillion for a few weeks, where I'll tentatively call it Season 2. But yeah, so if you don't normally stick around for the fun fact, that's on you. Go fuck yourself. But for everyone else, let's get to the fun fact. So, in 1938, Rolkin Tolkien was in negotiations with a German publisher to get The Hobbit in print in Germany. The publisher was called Rutten and Lening, and I probably fucked that right up. And due to a policy by a certain Joseph Goebbels on Jews participating in German cultural activities, they asked to see proof of Tolkien's Aryan descent before publication. The deal didn't go through, and The Hobbit wouldn't be translated in German until 1957. And a draft response was unearthed that may or may not have been sent by Tolkien, because it was one of 2 draft letters that he sent to his publishers in England. But eventually, we know the deal didn't go through, but one of these draft letters shows his disdain for them and his opposition to the injustice of the whole regime. And in general, Tolkien is against, obviously he's against these things. There's been some levels of, some accusations of racism, etc., but we'll get into that in other episodes because basically it holds no fucking water. An excerpt from this letter, where they demanded to see proof of his Aryan descent, says, "Thank you for your letter. I regret that I am not clear as to what you intend by Arish. I am not of Aryan extraction. That is Indo-Iranian. As far as I am aware, none of my ancestors spoke Hindustani, Persian, Gypsy, or any related dialects. But if I'm to understand that you are inquiring whether I am of Jewish origin, I can only reply that I regret I appear to have no ancestors of that gifted people. My great-great-grandfather came to England in the 18th century from Germany. The main part of my descent is therefore purely English, and I am an English subject, which should be sufficient." So that's Tolkien giving that patented clapback of fuck off, you don't even know what it means.
No, you're racist.
Well, it's the thing is, so I went into a bit more detail. But
is that why, just before bed, you shouted at me?
When did Hitler come to power?
Yeah. And I just gave you the answer.
Yeah, I was falling asleep.
It's normal for you to ask random questions.
Yeah, it's Hitler's birthday today, coincidentally. Which is weird because I put this fun fact up a few days. I'd researched this, and it was
meant to be.
It might have been, but I wasn't intending this fun fact on this episode. But it's just how it happened. But Tolkien giving a clap back. So for anyone confused about why he said that, and you think Aryan means white, it's not the case really. So Aryan has historically referred to an ancient culture who certainly weren't fucking white Germans. However, in the 1850s, a man called Arthur de Gobineau, or Gobineau, or Gobeldies, folded the term Aryan into his racial category theories that tried to legitimize racism by the usual methods of there's a ruling class that's genetically superior, blah blah blah. Sometimes it's the aristocrats and the peasants, like in his time that he was talking about. Sometimes it's Germans and Aryans and non-Aryans. We've seen it all before. There's always an argument at one point or another. It's we're just better than them by design.
Yeah.
There's that fucking Sigma male grind set that's been throughout history. But anyway, through this cunt, some other cunts got hold of it, and that influenced Nazi race ideology. So Tolkien was aware of this. He knew what the actual historical term for Aryan was, and he certainly knew it didn't mean what they thought it meant. And as usual, points out in a very good way how fucking stupid it is.
Yeah.
But yeah, I thought I'd give you a bit of a historical fun fact about Tolkien this week. What were your thoughts on the episode in general? How do you think this whole season's gone? In fact, because we've covered up a bit of a chunk of the Silmarillion.
I mean, I thought we would just do one podcast.
Yeah, you got sucked in there, didn't you?
So yeah, no, I've enjoyed it. Unfortunately, the quiz at the beginning didn't prove that because I can't remember any of the names.
To be fair, right, just before we started recording,
I was pegging out laundry.
You were outside. You were outside hanging up the washing, and I opened my office window and was like, "You fucking hurry up!"
Yeah, so you know.
Yeah, no, fair. I'm not going to go too hard on you.
I don't just. I mean, it might seem like I dream about old Tollers. I live in Toller's footsteps, but like, yeah, the names are just crazy. Maybe I need we need to get that big whiteboard.
Oh, I'm not getting that back out.
And draw all over it like a sort of diagram of all the names and.
No, because the last time we had a whiteboard up, your dad just wrote some mad weird networking shit on it. And I just don't want to give him that opportunity anymore because I hate networking, and I've told him this. But it's because it's the IT thing he knows best. So he thinks every time he tells me the same shit, and I'm like, those protocols haven't been in use for years.
No, but there was also times where you've written inappropriate things.
Oh yeah, and I've been on work calls. So... yeah. At one point, I wrote lose weight, you fat cunt, and it was behind me on the whiteboard while I was on a big call, and my manager at the time, she was like, "What's that written behind you?" It was motivating for me. Anyway, so...
Yes, so I've enjoyed it, and I'm excited to find out more. At the moment, I'm just more interested in finding out about the dwarves. The elves are like the pretty girl at school.
I know.
They're kind of I think elves are kind of like girl next doorish vibes as well, kind of like the plain Janes.
Do you know what they are? The dwarves are Kesha, and elves are Taylor Swift.
Yeah, you just... Dwarves...
You'd fuck them both, but you know Kesha's going to go weird.
Why? Why do we have to bring it round to that?
I don't know. I can't stop myself.
But the dwarves are the nitty gritty.
Yeah, dwarves, hands down, are the best one. Maybe when we
They are like medieval history to me.
Yeah, maybe when we get back to the actual Silmarillion, we might jump ahead a bit and talk about the sack of Nagothrond and stuff like that.
Yeah, they're just a juicy topic. They just... piqued my interest before I even have found out about them. So
same. One last note from me is that I'm re-editing, as I mentioned at the top of the show, I'm re-editing the episodes where Becca first watched the Lord of the Rings films. There is a lot of editing that is required because we've come a long way.
What are you talking about?
We've come a long way technically since we first started this podcast, so I wanted to reflect what the episodes are like. And it's also hard to edit when you were absolutely rat-ass through all of them. So I'm just listening.
I'm glad you're listening to them because
it's fucking tough because I'm because the worst thing is I don't sound drunk, but then I'll say something weird and I'm just oh god, I was wrecked.
But everyone else listening thinks oh, that weirdo.
Aye, but no, with that we've had quite a lengthy detour, but let's thank you for listening through the first season. And we'll catch you next week. The schedule is going to go on as normal. We'll catch you next week with a yet unannounced episode that I've started researching. So it's a goodbye from me, Chris.
And goodbye from Rebecca.
And have a good day.